Welcome, everyone, to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin, along here with Coach Katie. Today is episode 8. And so the date is May 20th of 2025 is when we're recording. And today's topic is taper. So many of you probably are starting to wind down a little bit of your training as you kind of approach maybe your first or second race of the season. And if you had like an early kind of hit out race in April, now you're kind of made some fine tunes to your training plan, and maybe now you're kind of coming into another race. And so today we're going to discuss some of the fundamentals of taper, why we need it, what are some things to consider during your taper, how to approach taper, um, and just the overall methodology. One thing that I think is important to note right off the bat is that this is not going to be a podcast. We're going to tell you exactly how you should taper. The reason is because tapering is a very, very unique and specific approach that you use for you. It has a number of factors that you consider, and if you're working with a coach, chances are they control your taper. But if you're a self-coached athlete, um, some of these ideas that we're going to discuss today can help you formulate your specific taper. But when it's not going to be this is not like the top 10 things that you should do during your taper, because everybody is so different, and how your training has gone is going to impact is one of the factors that impacts your taper. So just we'll do a little bit of back and forth. So Katie, how have you been doing? Good. So this is going to be a timely episode for you. We can, so yeah, I guess. uh, mhm. Yeah, let's start there. Um, so let's see. So there's three things that I typically how I typically approach a taper either for myself or one of my athletes. You have the option to decrease volume and keep intensity. You have the option of keeping volume constant but decreasing the intensity, or some combination of the both where you're decreasing volume and intensity. So that's typically how I those are the three primary approaches that you use um, to for your taper. Like I said, my everyone's taper is different. So for instance, now I'm about 2.5 weeks out from my A race for the season, and so my tapers for my previous two races were I kept intensity and I decreased duration. So if your training plan is in miles, like you typically like to use, Katie, you decrease your miles, and so you can use an approach where the if you want to do a 3 week taper, you would reduce. You'd count back 3 weeks. The first week being the week of your race, then you count back another week, and then another week, and that's when you start your taper. And you can reduce volume by, let's say, 25%. So that means that you're doing 75% of your max volume that week. And then you reduce it another 25%, which now means that you're down to 50% of your max volume. And then the week of your race, you drop down another 25%. So you're at your 25% of your max volume. Caveat to this. So the length of your taper is going to be a function of several things. So I want to step back a little bit rather than talking about tapering and talk about how your training has gone. So I'm going to totally disregard what the duration of the race is, because you could be talking about marathons, full Ironmans, half Ironmans. So the duration of your taper is going to be a function of the duration of your race. So the longer the race, typically, the longer the duration of the taper. However, if the training consistency over your training block has been low, you may not need that full time that is typically used. So let's say that. Okay, so when I did my full Ironman, I did 3 week tapers, but my training was really, really consistent. I didn't really take days off during that. So the idea behind training is to accumulate fatigue, right? We want to build adaptation, and adaptation is achieved by stressing the body. Well, the thing about stress is that it will mask your fitness. So I've had instances where athletes kind of get frustrated a little bit with their plan, and this goes for me as well. Whereas I kind of get in my own head, it's like, man, these runs, this zone two with a little bit of zone three tempo work in it feels harder than what it should. Okay, well, the reason behind that is because my fatigue. I've started to accumulate fatigue, and the more consistent you are, and the higher your volume climbs, the more fatigue that you start to stack on. So that starts to mask your fitness, because sometimes you say, "Man, I feel like I'm getting slower or I'm getting weaker." Or in order to generate the same power on the bike, I have to try harder. So one of the reasons that this is taking place is because you're accumulated fatigue throughout your training volume. Now, if you're the type of athlete who likes to insert days off, like rest days within your training plan, that is also going to impact the duration of your taper, because those rest days are in there to allow you these little mini breaks to shed some fatigue. So if you don't really take those, and you just kind of train through it, then you may need the longer taper. But if you've prescribed, the stand, like, the typical, like, a Monday off kind of thing, which I do not employ, unless athletes specifically ask me, hey, I want Mondays off or I want Fridays off. And typically it results in a whole conversation on, well, why is that? because I want to understand their mindset behind it. So these little quote unquote 24-hour mini tapers is kind of how you view them. And so that will impact the need for a longer taper at the end. So you may shorten your taper as you've kind of shed fatigue throughout the training process. Typically for me, I won't take days off. My body tells me when I need them. So I don't automatically put them in my plan. So I know, wait a minute, I need a day off, or I need to alter my plan and do some, rather than go for a run, I jump on the elliptical, in order to give my feet a break, or to rest my Achilles or whatever. I'll do those sorts of things. So I will give myself a nice decent sized taper towards the end of the plan. What I've been doing over the past months for my two races is I did sprints, so they're very, very short races, but my training volume is really, really high. So what I did was I gave myself a full week of taper, and it's going to be the week of my race. For a marathon, like with something like Katie is doing, she may employ like a full like 3 week taper as you've got this gradual decline in volume. Mhm. Yeah. Right. Right. Mhm. Right. Yeah, no, you bring up a great point. When it comes to, what type of race are you tapering for, in terms of its importance to you? So, an A race, you may want to pay particular attention to certain things during your taper. But if you're using if your race is more of like a B or a C race that you may be using to test different strategies. For instance, if I'm working with an athlete or even myself, if I say, hey, this race that I've got coming up, my goal isn't necessarily to race hard, but let's say, if I'm doing like a sprint triathlon, I may say, I'm going to swim controlled, but I'm going to drop the hammer on the bike. I want to ride as hard as I can and see how it affects my run. And so, when you come up with these different strategies for races, this is going to impact the quality of the taper. You can also use these. I don't want to call them less important races because to me, every race is important. Otherwise, why do it? I mean, you can just go out on your own and you can do race efforts and you can do race simulations. Yeah, you don't get the same thing in terms of, dealing with crowds and dealing, trying to navigate, for instance, on the bike, you're trying to understand the rules in terms of, hey, how far can I be back behind somebody? What does it mean by exiting the draft zone and make my pass? Those sort of things that you're testing or you're but you can use race simulations during your training plan to determine, hey, how is my nutrition strategy working? Do I need to fine tune those because I'm throwing in some race efforts? So I'm going to see how my body reacts to trying to absorb nutrients at those higher intensities. Or if you're practicing transitions, for triathlon, or you're using to determine on whether your training plan is working. If you have a particular marathon race pace and you want to see how your plan is working, you may use race simulations as a way to test the effectiveness of your training plan. You can also use these to to play around with different tapering strategies. So let's say you want to say, all right, I've got this B race coming up. I'm going to race as if I'm racing it, but I want to test what it feels like to kind of go in with only like a 3 day taper, or I want to use a 4 day taper, or there's something else that I want to test out during my taper period to see how it affects me on race day. Those are great tools to use to fine tune your taper strategy that you're going to be using for future races. You find out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Typically, what I would do is I'm like Katie. I'll front load my intensity earlier in. So if when I approach race week, I'll still front load a whole bunch of intensity in the earlier part of the week. So I'll do some big gear work. I'll do some speed work on like Monday or Tuesday, coming in off of maybe a higher volume weekend. And then I know that that gives me about 4 days to shed whatever fatigue that I accumulated during those particular sessions. Um, um, you have any other thoughts about what it means to use intensity during your taper period and how to place it and within sessions? How to manipulate intensity within a session during your taper week. Right. Mhm. Right. Right. Hmm. No. Hmm. Right. Yeah, you brought up a great point in that taper is not the time where you're still trying to accumulate fitness. You're not trying to accumulate stress in order to build adaptation. And I made that mistake earlier on in my pursuit of, endurance sports, where, and this is just out of ignorance, I didn't know any better. And so, I would be doing, really high intensity stuff like leading up to race day. And my thought process was, I don't want to lose fitness. And I think that's a common mindset for people that are maybe a little bit newer to the sport. to where they're afraid that they're quote unquote going to get weaker, or they're going to get slower, or they still have opportunities to get faster. Um, that, like I said, that is not the time to start, trying to stack on more stress. And you're not going to lose fitness, during that time period. If anything, you maintain fitness, but while you shed fatigue, you can actually observe your fitness. And the goal is to observe it on race day. It's not to observe it during taper, because that's too early. We don't want to observe our peak fitness, during a training session. That's just not what we want. We want it on race day, perfect part, appropriately timed, and dialed in. And I think that intensity is great because it keeps. I tell myself and I tell my athletes, we do want a little bit of tension in the muscle. That's what we want. We want that little. We still want that pop, because we're trying to tell our bodies, hey, I've demanded a lot out of you during this training period. I know you're tired, and I know that your muscles are a little bit sore and you're hurt, and you're ready to be done. But we're not done yet. But I do want to give you a little bit of relief. And so that's what you're trying to tell your body. It's like, no, it's not race day, and we're not past race day. We're recovering. We're not recovering. Where I don't know a different word for it, because I mean, to me, recover is more appropriate for post race day. So it's like, yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So, right. I've been sitting here trying to think. It's like, well, what kind of word would be appropriate for something like taper? So it's like a little mantra that you can say to yourself during taper, because the next piece that's going to come up is the mental aspect of tapering. Um, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, no, we can go that route. Because I think that as I've been sitting here trying to think, I was like, okay, what is a word that I would associate with taper? And the word repair keeps coming to mind. So it's like, we're not recovering because we haven't done it yet. So recovery is more appropriate for post race. During taper, I would associate the word repair. So if you just keep telling yourself, what is the purpose of this taper? The word repair should just keep coming to mind. I'm repairing myself to to race. So I'm repairing the damage that I've done during training so that I can reach my peak performance on race day, and then post race day our focus shifts to recovery, recovering from that hard that hard race effort. So if repair works for you, great. I'm actually going to start using it because I mean, to me, it makes sense. And I was like, ah, great. So let's roll with that. I'll let you know how it works. So yeah, yeah, right, right. So one of these little statements that I thought was appropriate for what we would call the taper crazies is tapering is a lot like giving a kid a bunch of sugar and telling them to go sit down. You know, it's just it's not going. It's challenging. It's challenging. Um, and I think that the advent of social media has made tapering harder, because what tends to happen is that, as you say, the hay is in the barn. You're effectively done. Now you're just kind of like keeping the engine primed up and ready to go. Now is not the time to go into all the little social media groups for the different races. And this is especially common for Ironman branded races where they have these Ironman specific groups, for a particular race. And people start saying, hey, this is what they're doing. And, this is the workouts that they still have. And I think that just generates a lot more insecurity, and you start to second guess what you've done. What you've done is what you've done. It that's it. I mean, you are where you are. If it hasn't gone the way that you envisioned it when you hit that register button, then it's not like you can accumulate. You can't get stronger. You can't accumulate more fitness. You just have to readjust those expectations that you formed way back when you registered for the race, which is common. Which is why when I work with my athletes the week of their race, I have them sit down and they start doing their race goals. I have a little form that's online, and I say, hey, go out to the website, access the race goal form, and they find the button that's tied to their race, whether it's a single sport race or a triathlon race, and they fill out the form. And I say, keep in mind how you feel your training has gone, not the way that I say that your training has gone. How do you feel your training has gone when you sit down to do these goals? And I think that these social media groups and Strava and everything else just lights a match for the insecurity that's just underlying there. It's just waiting to come out because this is going to be common no matter what, whether you're a new athlete, whether you're a seasoned athlete, or I imagine it's present in the pros as well because everybody has questions. Or what else could I have done? Because that's what we do. I mean, that's why we train. We try and find ways to build adaptation, small adjustments here and there, and now you start to question yourself. It's like, what adjustments should I have made? Well, that word should that should ring true. Should past tense. You can't go back. So now what you can do is you can say, how did my training go? Now what adjustments can I make going forward, which is fine. And I typically will have my athletes go through that process after the race. So we'll have our race debrief, and I'll send them the report that I send my athletes. I say, "This is how your training has gone. These are my insights, how it went. This is how you stacked up against your goals." And there's a section at the end of the report that says things to focus on going forward. And this is where I kind of spell out what I think that we can do to fine tune the plan, to make some small adjustments or big adjustments. You know, based on how things went. So what I typically will do leading up to a race, and let's say if I'm doing an Ironman branded race, I'm doing like a 70.3 or a full, i'll just I'll just silence that group, and I just tell myself I can't go there. I can't go there because you will find these knuckleheads that are doing, like, they're doing a full, and now they're going to say, "Hey, it's race week." Or I'm in the last week and my next week is race week. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a 6 hour bike ride, and I'm going to run, 2 hours off the bike. It's my last big brick. And a horrible, horrible, horrible approach. Um, and then that's going to leave you saying, well, I didn't do any 6 hour bike rides and no 2 hour run off the bike. Is that what I'm lacking? Is that what I'm missing? And then, yeah, you don't want that kind of seed buried into your head going into training. So I turn those off. So yeah, that's the difference. Yep. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. It's a visualization. Yeah. Yep. Mhm. Right. Yeah. 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 Mhm. Yep. Yeah, there's two things that I want to bring up is during your taper period, it's a great time to execute uh, different strategies on. I don't want to say strat. Maybe that's the wrong word. So, and maybe this is just specific to triathletes because we have like more equipment that we're using. I mean, for runners, you've got your shoes. So you may say, what happens if I break a shoelace or something like that? So you want to run through that method, in your head. It's like, okay, well, maybe I'll just throw some, extra shoelaces, in my pocket. And if, you know, when they fire the gun and it's ready to run and I don't need them, I can throw them in the trash can. No big deal. But for a triathlete, you've got swim goggles, we've got bikes, we've got wetsuits, we've got all kinds of stuff that we have to deal with. And I had this happen last week, and I'm so thankful that it did. Is I was about 5 minutes from the end of my bike ride. I was so close to the car, and I was riding. I was having a fantastic workout, and I didn't see this what felt like a boulder in the middle of the road, and it was just a rock. But when I hit that thing, it felt like somebody just shook the earth. And so I was like, okay, well, I don't know why I didn't see that. Maybe I was just distracted for a second. um, but I was like, and I just felt the whole bike just shake under me. So I was like, okay. And so far it was okay. I was like, okay, all right. And then I felt it. I felt it in the front handlebars. I was like, "Du-du-du-du-du-du-du-du." I was like, oh, flat tire. And I was like 5 minutes from being done. I was like, come on. But I'm so thankful that it happened because it was great practice on how to change a flat. And it has been a hot minute since I've had to change a flat. And so I took out, like, I just laid the bike down. I was like, and I kept my cool, which is fantastic for me because I tend to run a little hot. And so I was like, okay, well, I just took the wheel off the bike. I was like, okay, took out my repair kit, and I've got an extra tube, and I've got bike levers and things like that. Took the tire off, and pulled the tube out. Looked at the tube, and I couldn't find a hole, so I don't really know what happened. But uh, and then I put the tube in wrong, and so I had to take the tube back out and then slide it in the other direction so that I could get the bead of the tire back on the rim. And so I went to fill up the tire with air, and I've got CO2 cartridges. And so I was like, oh crap, I can't remember how to use these things. And so I was like, I put the little CO2 cartridge in the little thing, and I screwed it on. I was twisting the lever, but no air was coming out. And I was like, oh no, is this old? I mean, is the CO2 cartridge bad? Because I had two of them. So then I took the other one out, put the other one in. I was like, no, this is still happening. So I seriously had to like break out my phone and Google how to use the CO2 cartridge. And it occurred to me as like, oh, I got to screw it in first into the head, and then put the little cover on it, and then it worked perfectly. So, but on race day, I would have not had my phone. So if this would have happened on race day, I'd be like, what's going on? I don't know what's going. I don't know how to fix this now. And so it was great practice. So this is a great time to deflate your tire and do it on both the front and back, so that, because dealing with a back flat is a lot more challenging than dealing with a front tire flat. So be aware on how to do that and how to do it calmly, because you're going to have adrenaline pumping. during your race, and now you're trying to you're shuffling around, and maybe your hands are a little wobbly, and so you're trying to move as quickly as possible, but you just have to remind yourself, slow down. Let's do this step by step. And this is a great time to practice it. In the pool, it's a great time to practice leaky goggles. So maybe loosen up one eyelet of your goggle and start swimming. And as water starts to leak in, practice, flipping over on your back, dropping the water out of it, tightening back down, those types of strategies. So taper is a good time to practice those things so that okay, this is what I do, A, B, C, D. And you've got it down so that if it happens on race day, you're not flustered. You're already going to be a little bit more emotional because it's like, oh, great. Now I got to deal with this. I was having a great race, or I wasn't having a great race, and now it's going to be even worse. So taper time is a great time to do those sorts of things. Um, mhm. Right. Mhm. Yeah. Yep. And I guess the second part that I would say is taper week is a great week, and we've talked about supplements to a certain extent, but I think it's a good time to kind of maybe increase some uh, preemptive supplements, whether that means taking some additional like vitamin C or things like that. Try and fight off some of the extra germs, or you're just being a little bit more cautious on what you're doing, and where you're putting yourself. So if you're working out at the gym, maybe be a little bit more cognizant of like wiping things down, because you're all touching stuff and everything. So it's easy to get those because the body is trying to repair itself. So in my mind, it's more susceptible to germs at that point in time. Um, and so those little small things that you can do to try and ward off um, you know sickness. Yeah, which is one thing that we want to talk about. So yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. 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 I think it's really important to know, and these were mistakes that I made early in my pursuits, was that I thought carb loading happened the night before. So if you've waited until the night before your race and you're like, all right, it's our big pasta dinner and we're carb loading, uh, you've missed the boat. Uh, Carb loading really takes place, you know, at least 3 days prior to the race. And so what I do with my athletes is I'll put little notes. We use Training Peaks for my athletes, and so I'll put little notes in the training plan. It's like, today is the start of, we're going to increase the carbs a little bit, whether that means, maybe have an extra sandwich, or something like that, as a snack in the middle, right between lunch and dinner, or something like that. Or, switch if you eat oatmeal, and maybe now's a good time to, throw in some waffles or whatever, increase the carbohydrates, per meal, and not just like loading up at dinner time. and load up all the carbs right then and there. If you can spread those carbs throughout the day and you're just increasing just a little bit, I think it's also important to know that this is not the time period where you make race weight. And I think that this was something that plagued me, that I wanted to feel fit. And feeling fit meant feeling light. And so then I would kind of go on this pursuit on, well, I don't want to eat this stuff because it's going to, make me feel heavier or whatever. And so that's really not the time to pursue, because it is so common to actually go into race day a little bloated. And I think that's a common approach, and it's encouraged, because what I also do with my athletes is that if I know that we're either, most of our races are going to be in the summertime, right? So we're sweating and everything else. So what I do is I have them preloading electrolytes. So when we increase carbs 3 days out, I say, hey, I want you drinking 1 to 2 bottles of electrolyte drink mix throughout the day. So you have one bottle sometime between breakfast and lunch, and then maybe another bottle between lunch and dinner. Now, these aren't like these like high sodium electrolyte drinks. Like Element may have, like 1,000 milligrams of sodium. The mixes that I typically use, which are like scratch, so they're a little bit on the lower end of the salt, so you can drink 2 bottles. If you drink something like Element, which is going to have a high level of sodium, maybe just use the 1 bottle, because it is so concentrated and loaded up. Yeah, or use like half the packet in 1 bottle, and then finish off the rest of the packet in a second bottle. But it's common for like those first few days to start preloading on electrolytes. So you may go in to your race day carrying some extra water weight, because you are going to feel a little bloated, but that stuff is going to go quickly while you're racing, as the sweat starts to roll. Hmm. Great. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Just doesn't feel healthy. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Mhm. Hmm. Yeah. I think something that you just brought up is really important, and it's the effect on the body from traveling. So if you're doing like a destination race and you're not racing like close to home, if you're driving, it's very common to not drink a whole lot while you drive to minimize the number of stops that you have to make to use the restroom or whatever. So I think that's a great point. Is that it's going to be a little bit more inconvenient, but I'd rather stop more to go to the bathroom because I'm drinking a lot than not drink enough and actually go into race day a little dehydrated. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's a little extreme. We can stop. So, yeah, there are two things that I do want to bring up before I start talking about sleep, which I think is really, really important for taper, is to understand the difference between fake hunger and real hunger. And it's something that I've had to deal with during taper is that sometimes my mind can kind of like go places because my volume has dropped a little bit. And so now my mind is wandering and I'm a little bit more preoccupied. And so I may get like these fake hunger pangs because I'm doing less. And to talk to yourself is like, okay, am I really hungry or am I bored? And trying to not necessarily, you don't want to overeat but you don't want to restrict calories either. So really kind of dive in mentally and ask those types of questions to yourself. Mhm. Yeah, right. Get the taper munchies. So mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. The taper munchies. Yeah. 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 Mhm. Yeah, so one of the things that I will do during my taper is where I'm a little bit more persistent and disciplined with my bedtime routine. It's like, I make sure that my phone is, buzzes when it's time to, start turning things off and I need to start winding things down. Um, It's actually another time where I may take now I mean I'm not recommending this to anybody, but this is what I will do is sometimes I take a little Tylenol or antiacetaminophen, and I take it at bedtime, and it will help me sleep because it kind of eases the muscle soreness that I've kind of experienced. And so because I know I want to sleep well, and sometimes when I'm running a little sore, I don't sleep well. So it's like you can't stay in one position, and you're kind of searching and rolling around, and all those little micro, you know, periods where you're waking up and moving position, even though you fall asleep quickly. Those things add up, throughout the night. So I may take, a little bit of Tylenol as a pain reliever to allow me to get a better quality sleep. So it's not necessarily that, oh, now I need to get 8 hours of sleep when you've never gotten 8 hours of sleep before in like the last like 6 months. Now is not the time to try and, hey, be that disciplined and say, hey, now I need 8 hours. No, you probably don't, because your body probably wouldn't know how to behave on 8 hours of sleep because you've never given it 8 hours of sleep. But rather than focus on how many hours I'm sleeping, I want you to play little games like focus on the quality of the hours that you do have. So if you say I normally sleep anywhere between 6.5 to 7.5 hours every each night, and that's what my body typically runs on. So you want to find a way to make those 6.5 to 7.5 hours of sleep quality, whether that means in the summertime turning the temperature down in the home so that it's a little bit cooler to help you sleep more soundly. Then do that. If it means that maybe you have to stop drinking fluids a little bit earlier in the evening, so maybe like no water after dinner or something like that, to minimize the risk of having to get up and go to the bathroom. As you get older, it's going to happen. So maybe use that approach, lessen that and focus all of your drinking, earlier on in the day up through dinner time. So focus on, and for goodness, just, yeah, turn the screens off. And that's one of the biggest things that I think that we can control, even though we don't want to. We can control the exposure to the screen, and if that means just like, hey, you know, I want to go to bed at 9:30, which is a reasonable hour, 9:30. So that means that like 8:45 or 8:30, if you want to be ambitious, you know, turn the phone off, or like if you're sitting in the living room, go in and, put it in the bedroom and put it on the charger, and then spend the last, 30 to 45 minutes, sitting in the living room, maybe winding down. If you want to read a little book before you go get in bed, then that's a great time to do that. But just turning off those screens would be really helpful. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So I think we've kind of covered everything that we wanted to cover. There's one thing that I do want to mention, and I will not go deep into this. So it is very common to feel these little niggles that will pop up. That is that is common. I call them phantom pains, because it's not an indication that you're injured. So if, let's say that you're running a marathon and that you're in taper week, and you feel just a slight pain in like one of your knees, and it's like it comes out of nowhere, but then kind of goes away. That is super common. All right. So yeah, don't freak out. It's all good. Yeah. Yep. I can't explain it. I don't know why it happens. It's like, I don't know if it's just your body's like, oh, I'm just fixing things, it just materializes that way. But it happens quite a bit, where I have an athlete that will reach out to me. She's like, oh my God, this, I'm feeling, pain in my hip now. And it's like, okay, well, let's see how it works tomorrow. And they're like, oh, I feel great. So, but this is super common. It happens all the time. So you don't have to freak out and say, oh my God, my race day is ruined. And you're like, 4 days away from it. So if you do feel like these little niggles pop up, chances are that's what it is, and just kind of evaluate the next day, or even in the same, like you were saying, it went away in the same session, so it just kind of materializes from nowhere. Yeah. Goes away. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think I mentioned that like in the last episode, where we did our recaps, and that's something that I've been doing as well. So I tested it both ways, where I removed the strength training, and, and then I raced, and then by the time I went back into the weight room, I wasn't feeling very fresh, and I just felt sluggish. And then I said, well, rather than remove it, let's reduce it. And so I kept the same number of sessions, the same movements, everything was the same, except I reduced weight, the heaviness of the weight anywhere between, I think it was like 45 to 50%. So, if you're doing, 60-pound dumbbells, and you're doing a flat bench press and you're using 60s, then maybe use 30 to 40s and keep the same number of reps and just focus on eccentric and concentric movements, rather than trying to like push heavy and lift heavy. I found that approach has been working for me. But many triathlon coaches are going to tell you, no, we're going to remove the strength training, 2 weeks out from your race, um, which is a reasonable approach, but something maybe you can test with like a B or C race that you've got. Say, hey, how does my body react by reducing volume, i.e., the weight, but keeping reps the same, and then do another race where you completely removed it and see if there was a big difference. So I think that's a pretty important point. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, don't add stuff to the training plan that you haven't been doing just because now you have the time. No, don't. No. Right. No. Right. Hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yep. I think what's interesting is that I think that we've only kind of scratched the surface on some of the things that we've tried and haven't tried during taper. And there's all kinds of like different workouts that I use for athletes and myself, during taper, what I call race prep workouts. And so those are great times to throw those in. So maybe we can come up with another podcast where we specifically focus on race week, rather than taper, which can be, up to 3 weeks. Maybe there's another podcast episode coming up that we can add that to the queue, and it's like, hey, these are the types of workouts that we do during race week, as race prep. So, but this was episode 8 of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie. This In this episode, we talked about the art of the taper. A while back, I wrote a blog about this particular topic, and a lot of what we talked about is in that blog. So I will post a link to that blog in the podcast description in the show notes. So if you'd like to follow up with some supplementary material and check out the blog, that would be great. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We've also, and it's something that we're not advertising during the outgoing message, is we created a private Facebook group for the podcast. And so if you go out on Facebook and you look up the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group, answer, I think it's like one or two, I think it's just a single question, and we'll let you in. We'll start want to start building a community. Now we're 8 episodes in, so this is something that we have not been pushing, but I kind of want to get the ball rolling and see if we can start to create, like I said, a community where we can all learn and support from each other. So that would be a great place to put those. Yep. Yeah. Yep. So again, that is the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group. That's not the same thing as the Facebook page dedicated to this podcast, which is just the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. You're going to put the word group at the end of that, and that is a private group. And so answer the question, and we'll let you in and start building the community. So thank you all for listening. We appreciate the time that you spent with us. We had a blast during this episode, and we will see you all again in 2 weeks. All right. Thank you for listening. Again, it's the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Talk to you later, Katie.